The Zorgon warrior pinned his Nausicaan victim to the wall with a muscular arm, pressing a jagged blade against the reptilian creature's neck until dark blood trickled. It would be so easy to end the pathetic lizard's life right here. But Zark, the hulking Zorgon leader, had other plans for the Nausicaan scum. Ethan Williams watched this disturbing scene play out from the shadows of the dimly lit academy corridor. The 20-year-old human student had only been at the Galactic Academy for a few weeks, but he had quickly realized that his new Nausicaan roommate Indus was in serious trouble. The prestigious academy was supposed to be a shining beacon of interstellar cooperation, a place where the brightest minds from across the universe came together to learn. But beneath the surface, old hatreds and prejudices simmered. As a Nausicaan, Indus faced constant discrimination and bullying from the other students, especially the Zorgons. The hulking reptilian warriors looked down on Nausicaans as inferior savages. Zark, their cruel ringleader, had made it his personal mission to make Indus's life a living hell. Despite the long history of conflict between humans and Nausicaans, Ethan had started to develop a tentative friendship with his roommate as they struggled through their challenging classes together. But now, as he watched Zark's gang surround Indus, Ethan realized the stakes were higher than he ever could have imagined. This wasn't just bullying. The hatred in Zark's eyes was murderous. Ethan knew the Zorgons wouldn't hesitate to beat Indus to a bloody pulp and leave him for dead, and the Academy administration would likely turn a blind eye, just as they always did when Nausicaans were targeted. Indus locked eyes with Ethan, silently pleading for help as the Zorgons pressed in. The human felt his heart pounding. He had a critical choice to make. He could walk away and not get involved like most students would. Or he could step up and risk everything to protect his alien friend, knowing full well that his actions could ignite a powder keg of simmering tensions between humans and Nausicaans that could ultimately lead to an all-out interstellar war. The fate of billions hung in the balance. Ethan balled his fists and took a step forward. Decision made. Ethan stepped forward, placing himself between Indus and the advancing Zorgons. He locked eyes with Zark, his voice steady. "Back off, Zark. I'm not going to let you hurt him." Zark sneered, his reptilian features twisting. "Stay out of this, human. This doesn't concern you." But Ethan stood his ground. He knew he couldn't take on the Zorgons alone, but he had a plan. Over the past few weeks, he had been secretly training Indus in hand-to-hand combat, teaching him to harness his species' natural strength and aggression. Night after night, they had practiced in their dorm room, Ethan showing Indus how to block, strike, and counter. Indus had been a quick study, his reflexes sharp and his purpose fierce. Ethan had also been busy digging up dirt on Zark, looking for any weakness he could exploit. It hadn't taken long to discover that Zark had been cheating on exams by hacking into the Academy's computer system. Ethan had anonymously tipped off the administration, knowing it was only a matter of time before Zark was caught. Now, as Zark and his goons closed in, Ethan put his plan into action. "I know about the cheating, Zark," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet corridor. "The administration knows too. It's over for you." Zark's eyes widened, then narrowed. "You're bluffing." Ethan shook his head. "Try me." With a roar of rage, Zark lunged forward, his fist aimed at Ethan's face. But Ethan was ready. He dodged the blow and countered with a swift kick to Zark's midsection, sending the Zorgon stumbling back. At the same moment, Indus burst out from the shadows, slamming into the other Zorgons with a ferocity that caught them off guard. He fought like a Nausicaan possessed, using every technique Ethan had taught him. Ethan jumped into the fray, standing back-to-back with Indus as they faced off against the Zorgon gang. Fists flew and blood spattered the walls as the roommates fought with everything they had. Just as they started to gain the upper hand, the sound of pounding footsteps echoed down the corridor. Academy security burst onto the scene, their stun batons at the ready. "Break it up!" the lead officer shouted, his voice booming. "All of you, stand down!" Ethan and Indus stepped back, their chests heaving and their knuckles bruised. The Zorgons lay groaning on the floor, Zark among them. Under questioning, Zark had no choice but to admit to plotting the ambush. At the same time, evidence of his exam cheating came to light. In a matter of hours, Zark and his cohorts were expelled from the academy in disgrace. Word of the incident spread like wildfire. Ethan and Indus were hailed as heroes by the other Nausicaan students, who had long suffered under the Zorgon's cruelty. For the first time, the administration was forced to confront the ugly undercurrent of discrimination that had festered for so long. As for Ethan and Indus, their friendship had been forged in the crucible of shared hardship. They were brothers now, bonded by something deeper than species or origin. But even as they celebrated their triumph, Ethan couldn't shake a sense of unease. He had made powerful enemies, both among the Zorgons and those of his own kind who still clung to old hatreds. He knew that his decision to stand with his Nausicaan friend would come at a cost. There would be those who would never forgive him for siding with the enemy. But as Ethan looked at Indus, saw the gratitude and respect in his friend's eyes, he knew he had made the right choice. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The Galactic Academy buzzed with activity in the weeks following the confrontation. Ethan and Indus walked through the main hall, passing a group of administrators huddled around a holoscreen displaying new policies. "Look at that," Ethan said, nodding towards the screen. "They're actually doing something about the discrimination." Indus clicked his mandibles in agreement. "It's about time, but I fear not everyone will embrace these changes." Their fears were soon realized. As they turned a corner, they came face to face with a crowd of human students gathered around a tall, charismatic upperclassman. "That's Grayson," Ethan whispered to Indus. "He's trouble." Grayson's voice carried through the corridor. "These new policies are nothing but reverse discrimination. Humans are being villainized for standing up for ourselves." The crowd cheered, their faces twisted with anger. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine as he recognized some of his former friends among them. Over the next few days, the tension in the academy grew palpable. Ethan sat alone in the cafeteria, his usual group of human friends conspicuously absent. He watched as Grayson and his followers marched through, chanting slogans against the new policies. Indus joined him, setting his tray down with a clatter. "This is getting out of hand, Ethan. We need to do something." Ethan nodded, his mind focused. "You're right. We can't let Grayson's hate win." They spent the next week organizing. Ethan reached out to students from various species, forming a coalition dedicated to promoting understanding. They set up booths in the Academy Square, handed out pamphlets, and organized cultural exchange events. During one such event, showcasing Nausicaan art and music, Grayson and his followers showed up, heckling the presenters and nearly starting a brawl. Ethan and Indus stood their ground, forming a human Nausicaan barrier between the xenophobes and the other attendees. Later that night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, replaying the day's events in his mind. A ping from his datapad jolted him fully awake. He opened it to find a message from an anonymous source. The contents made his blood run cold. It was a partial transcript of a conversation between Grayson and his inner circle, detailing plans to sabotage the Academy's life support systems. Ethan's mind raced. If they succeeded, countless non-human students would be at risk. He glanced at Indus, sleeping peacefully in the next bed. The choice before him was clear, but the consequences were murky. If he reported this to the authorities, he'd be labeled a traitor by his own kind. If he tried to stop Grayson himself, he risked escalating the conflict into open warfare within the Academy. Ethan sat up, his datapad clutched in his trembling hands. The fate of the Academy, perhaps even the future of human-alien relations, hung in the balance. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. "Indus," he called out, his voice barely above a whisper. "Wake up, we've got work to do." Ethan's mind raced as he processed the contents of the anonymous message. Reporting Grayson's plot to the authorities could backfire spectacularly, potentially igniting the very powder keg they were trying to defuse. No, they needed a different approach. He nudged Indus awake. "We've got a situation," Ethan said, showing him the message. Indus's eyes widened as he read. "By the moons of Nausicaa," he breathed. "What do we do?" Ethan laid out his plan. They'd stop Grayson themselves, with help from a select group of trusted allies. Indus nodded, his mandibles clicking with commitment. Over the next few days, they discreetly recruited a small team. Zikatral, a Arcturian tech whiz, Lyra, a nimble Centaurian, and Vox, a hulking Rigelian with a heart of gold. Each brought unique skills to the table. Indus got to work, his claws flying over holographic interfaces as he wormed his way into the Academy's security systems. "I'm in," he announced after hours of tense work. "We can track Grayson's every move." They watched, gathering intel. Grayson and his cronies moved with purpose, their conversations laden with coded phrases. It wasn't long before the team pieced together the plot. "The welcoming ceremony," Ethan said, the realization hitting him like a punch to the gut. "That's when they'll strike." The night before the ceremony, Ethan's team put their countermeasures in place. They crept through maintenance tunnels, rigging force fields and rerouting backup systems. Every step was nerve-wracking, the fear of discovery constant. As dawn broke, Ethan watched the new students arrive, his stomach in knots. Dignitaries made flowery speeches about unity and cooperation, if they only knew. Then it happened. Alarms blared as Grayson's team made their move, but instead of chaos, they found themselves trapped, cut off by shimmering force fields. "It worked!" Lyra exclaimed, but their victory was short-lived. Shots rang out as Grayson's trapped followers engaged with security forces. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, leaving scorch marks on pristine walls. "We need to get these people out of here," Ethan shouted over the din. He and Indus worked in tandem, guiding terrified students and diplomats to safety. In the chaos, Ethan spotted a familiar figure slipping away. "Grayson," he growled, giving chase. He pursued Grayson deep into the bowels of the academy, through twisting service tunnels bathed in red emergency lighting. Sweat dripped down Ethan's back as he ran, his lungs burning. Finally, he cornered Grayson in a dead-end passage. The xenophobe's eyes were wild, a disruptor pistol clutched in his trembling hand. "It's over, Grayson," Ethan said, inching closer. "You don't understand," Grayson spat. "We're protecting humanity." "No," Ethan replied. "You're destroying everything we stand for." What followed was a brutal hand-to-hand struggle. Fists flew, bodies slammed against metal walls. In the end, Ethan managed to wrench the disruptor from Grayson's grasp, subduing him with a well-placed strike. As Ethan dragged Grayson back to the surface, the full scope of the conspiracy unraveled. Evidence implicated top administrators in enabling Grayson's agenda. The academy erupted into chaos. Ethan and Indus found themselves at the center of a storm. Some hailed them as heroes, champions of unity. Others hurled accusations of betrayal. As protests raged and tensions boiled over, Ethan exchanged a worried glance with Indus. They'd won the battle, but the war? That was just beginning. The Galactic Academy fell silent, its halls emptied by the lockdown order. Ethan paced the confined space of his dorm room, the tension palpable. Indus sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the datapad in his claws. A soft chime broke the silence. Indus's mandibles clicked as he decrypted the incoming message. "Ethan," he hissed. "Grayson's escaped." Ethan's blood ran cold. He snatched the datapad, scanning the encrypted text. "Damn it," he muttered. "He's got followers with him, too." They huddled over the device, piecing together fragments of information. Reports trickled in of a takeover at the auxiliary power station. Ethan's mind raced, calculating the potential fallout. "We can't wait for the administrators to sort this out," Ethan said, his voice low and urgent. "We need to act now." Indus nodded, his eyes gleaming with a predator's focus. "I'll contact my network. We'll need access codes." While Indus worked his connections, Ethan reached out to their trusted allies. Ziktral's antennae twitched with excitement at the challenge. Lyra's lithe form tensed, ready for action. Vox's massive hands clenched into fists. Under the cover of artificial night, they slipped from their dorms. The usually bustling corridors were eerily empty as they made their way to a service hatch. Ethan keyed in the code Indus had procured, and the panel slid open with a soft hiss. The maintenance tunnels were a maze of shadows and echoes. Their footsteps, muffled by years of accumulated dust, still seemed thunderous in the oppressive silence. Ethan led the way, guided by memorized schematics and Zictral's tech. As they neared the power station, the distant crackle of weapons fire reached their ears. Ethan nodded to Lyra, who melted into the darkness to trigger their prepared distractions. Moments later, alarms blared throughout the facility. Ethan raised his hand, signaling the team forward. They burst from the tunnel, plasma rifles at the ready. The control room was chaos. Grayson's followers, caught off guard by the multiple assaults, scattered in disarray. Ethan's team pressed their advantage, pushing deeper into the facility. In a side corridor, Indus came face to face with Grayson. The human's eyes burned with hatred as he lunged at the Nausicaan. Indus met the attack head-on, his superior strength driving Grayson back. The two grappled fiercely, a brutal dance of fists and feet. Indus gained the upper hand, pinning Grayson against a wall. But victory was short-lived. A searing pain exploded in Indus's back. He stumbled, his grip loosening. One of Grayson's loyalists had struck from behind, a vibroblade humming in his hand. Ethan saw his friend falter and raced toward them. "Indus!" he shouted. Grayson's hand slammed against a control panel. Blast doors slammed shut, cutting Ethan off from the others. He found himself alone in a narrow corridor with Grayson, the sounds of battle muffled by the thick metal. Grayson sneered, circling Ethan like a predator. "Just you and me now, traitor!" They clashed in a frenzy of strikes and counters. Ethan fought with everything he had, but Grayson's rage lent him terrible strength. A lucky blow sent Ethan sprawling, his head ringing. Grayson loomed over him, fists raised for a finishing blow. In that moment, Ethan saw not just his own defeat, but the failure of everything they'd fought for. With a roar of defiance, he surged upward, tackling Grayson to the ground. They rolled across the floor, trading desperate blows. Ethan's vision blurred, his body screaming in pain. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Finally, Grayson's struggles weakened. Ethan pinned him, gasping for breath. The blast doors retracted, and his team rushed in. As Vox secured the unconscious Grayson, Ethan slumped against the wall. His body was a map of cuts and bruises, each breath a fresh agony. But they'd won. They'd stopped Grayson. Zictral knelt beside him, concern etched on his alien features. "Hold on, Ethan. Help's coming." Ethan nodded weakly, his gaze seeking Indus. His friend stood nearby, leaning heavily on Lyra but alive. Their eyes met, a wealth of unspoken words passing between them. As the adrenaline faded, Ethan felt the full weight of his injuries. He fought to stay conscious, knowing the battle might be over, but the war for the soul of the academy was far from. The acrid stench of disinfectant assaulted Indus's nostrils as he stood vigil by Ethan's bedside. The steady beep of life support machines punctuated the sterile silence of the medical bay. Indus's claws twitched, longing for action, for an enemy to fight. But here, in this realm of gleaming chrome and pulsing holoscreens, he was powerless. Ethan lay motionless, his skin pallid beneath a web of medisensors. A stasis field shimmered around him, suspending him between life and death. Indus pressed a hand against the barrier, feeling its warmth but unable to touch his friend. "You must decide soon," the Tellarite doctor grunted, tapping at a datapad. "The longer he remains in stasis, the greater the risk of neural degradation." Indus's mandibles clicked in frustration. "There must be something more we can do." The doctor's pig-like snout twitched. "We're already pushing the limits of xenobiology. His human physiology wasn't designed for this level of trauma." A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the medbay's transparent walls, Indus saw a group of human students arguing with security. Their faces were contorted with anger, fists pounding against the unyielding barrier. "Traitor!" one of them shouted, his words muffled but unmistakable. "Let the race mixer die!" Indus's blood boiled. He took a step toward the door, but the doctor's stubby hand on his arm gave him pause. "Don't," the Tellarite warned. You'll only make things worse. Indus's shoulders slumped. He turned back to Ethan's still form, his mind a maelstrom of conflicting thoughts. The Nausicaan way demanded strength, demanded that the weak be culled. But Ethan had shown a different kind of strength, one that Indus was only beginning to understand. He fought for all of us, Indus rumbled, his voice low. Human, Nausicaan, everyone. How can I abandon him now? The doctor's eyes softened. Sometimes the greatest strength is in knowing when to let go. Indus shook his head, his decision crystallizing. No, Ethan never gave up on anyone. I won't give up on him. As if in response to his words, alarm suddenly blared. The stasis field around Ethan flickered, his body convulsing. Neural cascade, the doctor shouted, rushing to the biobed. We're losing him. Indus watched in horror as medical staff swarmed around Ethan. His friend's body arched off the bed, muscles spasming. The scent of ozone filled the air as the stasis field struggled to contain the seizure. In that moment, Indus made his choice. He shoved past the startled medical team and plunged his hands into the stasis field. Energy crackled around him, setting his nerves on fire. He gritted his teeth against the pain and gripped Ethan's shoulders. Fight, you stubborn human, Indus roared. You didn't come this far to die now. The alarms continued to wail. Indus felt Ethan's body go limp beneath his hands. The medical staff stood frozen, caught between protocol and the unprecedented situation unfolding before them. Indus leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. We need you, Ethan. I need you. Don't leave us now. For a heartbeat, nothing changed. Then, miraculously, the alarms quieted. Ethan's vital signs stabilized, the frantic beeping of the monitors settling into a steady rhythm. Indus staggered back, his hands smoking from the stasis field's energy. The doctor gaped at him, then at the readouts. Impossible, the Tellarite muttered. His neural patterns, they're stabilizing. How did you... Indus ignored him, his eyes fixed on Ethan's face. Had he imagined it, or had there been the faintest flicker of movement beneath those closed eyelids? Outside the medbay, the crowd had grown. Humans and aliens alike pressed against the transparent walls, their earlier animosity forgotten in the face of the drama they'd witnessed. Whispers rippled through the throng, a mix of awe and uncertainty. Indus straightened, suddenly aware of the weight of their stares. He'd made his choice, for better or worse. Now he had to live with the consequences. Consequences. The harsh glare of the medbay lights assaulted Indus's eyes as he blinked away the disorientation. His scaled skin tingled with residual energy, the after effects of the psychic connection still coursing through his body. The cacophony of alarms and shouted orders filled his ears as he pushed himself to his feet. Clear the area, a Tellarite medic barked, shoving past Indus with a crash cart. The Nausicaan stumbled back, his gaze locked on the rippling surface of Ethan's stasis pod. Through the translucent membrane, Indus caught glimpses of Ethan's body convulsing. The human's limbs jerked spasmodically, his back arching off the bed. A team of doctors swarmed around him, their hands a blur of motion as they worked to stabilize their patient. Indus pressed his palms against the cool surface of the pod, his breath fogging the membrane. Fight, Ethan, he growled, his voice barely above a whisper. Come back to us. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. Indus stood rooted to the spot, his muscles tense, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. He watched as the medical team inserted tubes, administered hyposprays, and manipulated glowing holograms of Ethan's neural patterns. Finally, the frenzy of activity began to subside. The alarms quieted, replaced by the steady beep of a stabilizing heartbeat. Indus felt a weight lift from his chest as he saw Ethan's body relax, settling back onto the bed. The lead doctor, a grizzled Andorian with antennae that twitched with fatigue, approached Indus. He's stable, she said, her voice hoarse. But he's not out of the woods yet. The next few hours will be critical. Indus nodded, unable to form words. He watched as the medical team dispersed, leaving only a single nurse to monitor Ethan's vital signs. With trembling hands, Indus pulled up a chair and resumed his vigil at Ethan's bedside. The events of the past weeks played through his mind in a dizzying whirlwind. He saw again the faces of his clan elders, contorted with disgust as they demanded he abandon his unworthy human friend. He heard the venomous words of the human extremists, their hatred a palpable force battering against his commitment. But above it all, one memory shone like a beacon, the day he and Ethan first met. Indus closed his eyes, letting the scene unfold in his mind's eye. The Academy's combat training arena materialized around him. He felt again the weight of the practice weapon in his hand, saw the wary faces of his human classmates. And there was Ethan, stepping forward with a determined set to his jaw, offering to spar with the fearsome Nausicaan that everyone else avoided. Their match had been fierce, a clash of different fighting styles and cultural approaches to combat. But in the aftermath, as they both lay panting on the mat, something had sparked between them, a mutual respect, a recognition of kindred spirits. Indus opened his eyes, focusing on Ethan's pale face. "You showed me a different kind of strength that day," he murmured, "a strength I never knew existed." As if in response to his words, Ethan's fingers twitched. Indus leaned forward, his heart racing. Slowly, painfully, Ethan's eyelids fluttered open. Indus?" Ethan's voice was a raspy whisper, barely audible. Indus grasped Ethan's hand, careful not to squeeze too hard with his Nausicaan strength. "I'm here, my friend. You're safe." Ethan's lips curved in a weak smile. "Knew you'd have my back." Before Indus could respond, the medical team rushed in, alerted by the change in Ethan's vital signs. As they began their examinations, Indus stepped back, his mind blown. In that moment, staring at his battered but alive human friend, Indus knew with bone-deep certainty that their journey was just getting started. The forces that sought to tear them apart, Nausicaan traditionalists, human xenophobes, and everyone in between, would not rest. But neither would they. Together, human and Nausicaan, they would forge a new path, a path that would shake the very foundations of the galaxy. The acrid smell of singed flesh lingered in Ethan's nostrils as he pushed himself up from the medbay bed. His muscles screamed in protest, each movement a reminder of his brush with death. The sterile white walls seemed to close in around him as he swung his legs over the edge, his bare feet touching the cold floor. "Easy there, human," a gruff voice warned. Ethan looked up to see Admiral Vragzan, the Riansu hawk former, watching him with piercing eyes. The Admiral's weathered face bore the scars of countless battles, his silver hair a testament to years of hard-won experience. "I'm fine," Ethan grunted, though his trembling legs betrayed him. He gripped the edge of the bed, fingers tightening with effort. Vraxan snorted. "You're as fine as a Klingon without his bat'leth, but we need you on your feet, and fast." The door hissed open, and Indus burst in, his massive Nausicaan frame filling the doorway. "Ethan!" he exclaimed, relief evident in his voice. "You're awake!" Before Ethan could respond, alarms blared throughout the medbay. The floor shuddered beneath their feet as a distant explosion rocked the Academy. "Oh, what the hell was that?" Ethan demanded, adrenaline surging through his system. Vragzan's face darkened. "The chaos you've unleashed by refusing to die, human. Come, we have much to discuss, and little time." As they hurried through the corridors, Ethan saw the fear etched on the faces of students and staff. Whispers followed in their wake, some filled with awe, others with barely concealed hostility. Miracle he survived. Should have let the traitor die. Sign from the gods. They reached a secure briefing room where holoscreens flickered to life, displaying scenes of carnage across the Academy grounds. Ethan watched in horror as Nausicaan huntmasters clashed with human extremists, their brutal combat leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. "This is what your survival has wrought," Vraxan said, his voice devoid of accusation. "To some, you're a symbol of hope. To others, an abomination that must be destroyed." Indus growled, his claws flexing. "Let them come. I'll tear apart any who threaten Ethan." "And that's exactly the problem," Vraxan countered. "Your friendship has become a rallying cry for both sides. The Nausicaan hardliners see you as a Daukman, Indus, a traitor to your own kind. Ethan's mind raced, trying to process the magnitude of the situation. And Grayson? What about his people? Vergzan tapped a control, bringing up schematics of the Academy's lower levels. Holed up in the utility tunnels, amassing weapons and followers, they see your survival as an unforgivable slight against human purity. So what's the play? Ethan asked, his voice stronger now as he felt purpose returning to his limbs. The Admiral's eyes glinted. We strike at the heart of both factions. You and Indus will lead teams to capture Grayson and Chieftain Karak simultaneously. By humiliating both extremist leaders, we might just shock some sense into their followers. Ethan exchanged a glance with Indus, seeing his own drive mirrored in his friend's eyes. When do we move? Now, Verizon said, pulling out a pair of sleek, matte black phasers. The Academy can't withstand much more of this conflict. It's do or die time, gentlemen. As they armed themselves and prepared to split into their respective strike teams, Ethan felt the weight of countless lives resting on his shoulders. He knew that his next actions could either heal the rifts tearing the Academy apart or plunge them all into an abyss from which there might be no return. The acrid smell of ozone filled the air as Ethan and his strike team crept through the dimly lit maintenance conduits. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his muscles taut with tension. The low hum of power conduits vibrated through the metal grating beneath their feet. This way, Ethan whispered, gesturing to a junction ahead. He'd spent countless hours studying these tunnels during his academy days, never imagining they'd become a battleground. As they approached Grayson's outer defenses, a shout rang out. Intruders! Open fire! The air erupted with phaser fire. Ethan dove behind a bulkhead, feeling the heat of energy bolts sizzling past. He returned fire, his weapon pulsing with each shot. Push forward, he ordered, leading the charge through the choke point. Meanwhile, high above the wilderness beyond the city, Indus clung to the hull of a Riansu assault craft. Wind whipped past as they streaked towards Karax's encampment. The Nausicaa's heart pounded, a mix of anticipation and dread coursing through him. As they neared the drop zone, alarms blared. Defensive fire lit up the sky, forcing the craft into evasive maneuvers. Indus gritted his teeth, bracing for impact as they made a hard landing. The moment his feet hit the ground, chaos erupted. Nausicaan warriors swarmed from all directions, their battle cries echoing across the camp. Indus raised his weapon, firing into the oncoming horde. For the Federation, he roared, his voice rising above the din of combat. Back in the tunnels, Ethan's team fought their way deeper into the rebel stronghold. The air grew thick with smoke and the scent of scorched circuitry. They battled room by room, corridor by corridor, inching closer to Grayson's command center. As they breached the final security door, Ethan's triumph turned to horror. Grayson stood before them, a cruel smile twisting his features. Behind him, holographic displays showed a countdown timer. Too late, Ethan, Grayson sneered. In 2 minutes, this entire level will be flooded with neurotoxins. Your precious non-augmented lungs won't stand a chance. Ethan's mind raced. He turned to his team, his decision made in an instant. Everyone out now. I'll handle this. As his team retreated, Ethan faced down Grayson's forces alone. His fingers flew over control panels, desperately seeking a way to override the venting system. Alarms blared, warning of the impending release. In Karax's war camp, Indus fought his way to the central tent. He burst through the flap to find the chieftain waiting, a massive disruptor cannon leveled at his chest. Traitor, Karax spat, you disgrace our people by siding with the humans. Indus didn't waste breath on words. He charged, dodging the first blast that tore a hole through the tent behind him. They clashed in a fury of strikes, Karax's augmented strength meeting Indus's unwavering drive. The ground shook with each thunderous impact. Indus felt his bones creak under the assault, but he pressed on. With a final, desperate lunge, he tackled Karax to the ground, pinning the chieftain's arms. As Riansu forces swarmed in to secure Karax, a priority alert cut through the comms. Indus's blood ran cold as he heard the report of an antimatter signature beneath the academy. Without hesitation, he sprinted for the nearest Stjärnerkraft. The sleek vessel roared to life beneath his hands as he punched in the coordinates for the academy. The landscape blurred around him as he pushed the craft to its limits, praying he wasn't too late. In the subterranean complex, Ethan's lungs burned. The air grew thin as he worked feverishly to disable Grayson's trap. His vision swam, black spots dancing at the edges. With a final, desperate command, he overrode the venting system. Victory was short-lived. A wave of searing pain washed over him as radiation from the now active antimatter device flooded the chamber. He staggered, gripping a console for support. Through the haze of agony, he saw Grayson's finger hovering over a final control. "If I can't have the academy," Grayson snarled, "no one will." The floor lurched beneath them. Ethan felt a sickening sensation of freefall as the entire sublevel detached from the academy's foundation. Through viewports, he saw the ground rushing up to meet them. In that moment, a blinding light filled the sky. Indus's Stjärnerkraft screamed into view, placing itself between the plummeting complex and the ground. The last thing Ethan saw before darkness took him was the craft's shields flaring as it absorbed the full brunt of the antimatter detonation. The Stjärner's shields flickered and died as Indus forced open the cockpit. Acrid smoke stung his nostrils, and the heat from smoldering debris seared his tough Nausicaan skin. He stumbled out onto a hellscape of twisted metal and vaporized concrete. Indus activated his tricorder, its faint beep barely audible over the crackle of fires and groan of settling rubble. A life sign, weak but present, pulsed on the display. He shoved aside a twisted bulkhead, muscles straining against the warped metal. "Ethan!" he called, voice raw from the toxic fumes. Deeper into the ruins he pressed until he saw a bloodied hand protruding from beneath a pile of debris. Indus dug frantically, tossing aside chunks of concrete and shards of metal. At last, he uncovered Ethan's broken form. Burns covered much of Ethan's body, his uniform in tatters. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead, and his breathing came in shallow, rattling gasps. Indus cradled his friend's head gently, mindful of his own strength. "Stay with me, brother," Indus pleaded. Ethan's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. Did it work?" he wheezed. "Yes," Indus said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved them. You saved them all." A ghost of a smile crossed Ethan's lips before his eyes rolled back, and he went limp in Indus's arms. Something snapped inside the Nausicaan warrior. He threw back his head and roared, a primal sound of grief and rage that echoed through the devastated complex. As the last echoes faded, Indus felt a shift deep within his soul. The old ways, the glory of conquest, the pride in subjugation, it all crumbled away like the ruins around him. In its place, a new purpose took root, forged in the crucible of this tragedy. The whine of approaching medics' equipment cut through his reverie. They rushed in, faces grim as they assessed Ethan's condition. Indus stepped back, allowing them to work. He watched as they carefully placed his friend into a stasis pod, Ethan's battered form disappearing behind the frosted glass. Indus turned away, his path clear. He strode through the wreckage, each step carrying the weight of his newfound determination. At the edge of the devastation, he found Karax, the Nausicaan chieftain bound and guarded by Federation security. "You," Indus growled, grabbing Karax by his restraints. "You will be the first." Karax spat at Indus's feet. "First of what, traitor?" Indus' eyes hardened. "The first to learn that our ways lead only to ruin. You will join me in the rite of Kerprovnu. We will forge a new path, not as conquerors, but as guardians." "You speak madness," Karax snarled. "No," Indus said, his voice low and dangerous. "I speak of the future, the Hu-Naruchath, the reforged. This is what we must become." Years passed. The academy rebuilt, scars slowly fading. Indus stood before a towering obsidian obelisk, its smooth surface etched with hundreds of names, a testament to the lives lost and forever changed that fateful day. He heard footsteps behind him and turned. A figure approached, clad in the ceremonial robes of the Hunarukath. As the man drew closer, Indus recognized the eyes, older now, filled with a wisdom born of pain and rebirth, but unmistakably Ethan's. No words were needed. Indus placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, feeling the strength that now coursed through his friend's remade body. Ethan nodded, a gesture that spoke volumes of their shared journey and the challenges still to come. Together, they gazed out over the academy grounds, where Nausicaan and human cadets trained side by side. The first notes of a new harmony, born from the ashes of conflict, echoed across the stars.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.